Just a little reminder, our in-class project should be on presentation sheets now, the standard presentation sheet that we use for our module. It's really helpful, and I'd like to take a minute and comment on some of the projects that were submitted that I thought were really kind of well done. So here's a presentation sheet. The student took the similar techniques we've done in our other modules and done this simple project on it. And I thought it was quite effective. I thought the idea of showing this wall section here really was very nice. And there are a few other examples here I'd like to share with you. Here's another one. The student decided to create a return or a side to that building, and I thought that was quite nice, taking the time to do that. And another example of almost a more technical layout. But I was really captured by or my attention was captured, besides this section cut through or the plan cut through this wall section here, the nice detailing or the nice shadow details that are created in this elevation, and done by our software. And so I'd like to kind of call up our attention to that. And once again, this is kind of on the idea about our moldings creating these kind of shadow details. So here you have, if you think about it, this was the student's one, and then I went ahead and made one without the grids on it. There are no lines showing here, so all of the shape and form that's being presented to us is all based on the idea of shadow. And I think if you look at the curve types of moldings that we made at the top and the bottom, and the spandrel elements that we created a little ridge on, all of these are reading effectively because of that little bit of shadow and light that's playing on them. So once again, I hope we can have a dialogue about this in class also, but I think that's an interesting piece of subject matter. Here's another nice project on the module that we did this week, using some of Revit's Entourage, although we seem very limited with what Revit offers. So, but nice to see the setting of scale. I thought this was a really attractive looking sheet that someone put together. I particularly like this front elevation here. And that kind of stimulated me to thinking a couple of things are going on. One is the project that we have just started is actually going on right now. And it'll be quite interesting to see in the future, like next year, if I'm going to redo this project, what kind of status this project will be at. So here we are looking from one end of the building, and these are the 4 units going from front to back. And you can actually see the units. This is 1, 2, 3, and 4. I hope my arrow is on the screen. You can actually see that there's these high mounds of dirt here. And that's where the garages will be once this is the wood that we see right now is the formwork for the footers to bear the load of the building on the soil. The next will go walls, and then these walls will be so high as this will be up at the level of where the garage basement floor or the garage floor will be. So they're keeping this dirt in place because they're just going to end up backfilling that hole where the garage will be. So as we're doing the project, it's going along also. The one of the other subjects I wanted to touch on, I was really surprised when I look at my old videos and then see what's getting drawn on the screens when you're working through the projects. And I was always I don't know, felt like it looked like what we're doing today looks faded out compared to what I was doing as short as 2 years back. And I think that's because Revit has changed some of the rendering engine, and I mentioned this before in lecture. So this week I decided to go through and call up the 2020 version of Revit, and then call up the current 22 version and do as identical as I could a rendering. And you can see that in fact these are remarkably different looking with the same settings. I can only tell you they're the same settings. I can't demonstrate that because these are screens clips. But the skies always seem to be rendering in the older version much darker. And there's some good points and bad points about this. And I would say really mostly the things that have changed have actually been positive. So if we look on the right here, this is the newer version of the rendering engine that's inside of Revit. And you'll notice that we start to get nice reflections and shadow details happening in the glass that we didn't get over here. Notice that even though the brick is in shadow over here, it's not so much in shadow that you can no longer see it. So there's a less of a harshness in the shadow details. So there are many things that really kind of cleaned up with Revit's rendering quality in newer versions. Another subject matter that I get mentioned a lot, and I wanted to, I guess, maybe direct you to some resources and maybe take a minute to talk about it. Rendering quality. When we do, the idea of the teapot ray traced rendering, many students complain that the resolution is not very high and they get a poor quality image. And there are many ways that you can adjust that. And actually, I've created a little bit of content, a YouTube video on Blackboard that it's called Frequently Asked Questions of Rendering Quality. Although I don't actually go through the question and answer thing, I just go through and state ways to adjust this rendering quality. And one of the quickest ways to do it is if you want higher resolution to your renderings, once you've created a screen size, you can go from what the screen printing setting is to what could be a printer setting. And you have the option to adjust the dots per inch, so to speak, the resolution of that image. And as you click up, the number of pixels that will get resolved will go up with it. So I encourage you, if you're having problems with getting high quality renderings, to visit my video and then experiment with some of these rendering settings. Another thing I wanted to experiment with this week on that idea or our of shadow and light was what would happen if we took the time to modify the profiles that we were using. So in our course, I believe I just make us have a square molding that we apply to our bump out. And I wanted to experiment with comparing a square molding to a chamfered one. And there's a good reason to chamfer a molding like this, not just for decorative purposes, but also to drive moisture off of it so that it wouldn't stay on top or roll back into the facade. And then I went ahead and rendered the square one and then rendered the other one just to see how the software would model these and whether there was a significant difference. And I think this is a good place to discuss in class whether, what's the value of doing this and does it actually look better. I think it's really quite subtle in model views, but in person it might be quite significant. But you'll notice now that when we have that chamfer, the top of the molding now is able to catch the daylight or the sky and have the appearance of being lighter. You can see the difference here. But if we were to go to the next one, you can see how this is the difference between a square one and a chamfered one. And I think the differences are quite subtle. But these are the kind of things that I like to experiment with just to determine whether things are actually significant or not significant. And many times you just don't, when you're doing a project, have the time to go back and forth and play with these. So the learning environment's a great place to do that. Another thing we can easily forget, lighting can work both ways on the exterior at nighttime. And this was a student a couple of years back, I believe it was, who actually put some exterior lighting on the building and to, I think, what is dramatic effect. So I would remind you to think about exterior lighting, not necessarily on this project, but going forward on other projects. It can start to, as you can see, the skim lighting is actually starting to almost looks like it's heightening the shadow detail on the stonework. It's lighting the molding from the bottom side, so it's starting to make things look entirely different and interesting. A student brought up the idea that in the interior design section that we worked, that they wish there was a little bit less of making families in Revit, when those same or similar elements could have been pulled out of the BIM website that provide these elements already well made. And in some ways, I totally agree with that. And the only caution I say with grabbing other BIM components, other than what I've already said, is that many times they may not exactly fit your needs, is this concept of what you might call file bloat. That means that the element that you bring in, the library element, might be a couple of megabytes, taking up a lot of not drive space, but file space, and maybe causing problems with Revit as far as how fast it runs. And I went ahead and Googled the idea of, kind of creating BIM elements and some of the etiquette or guides to it. And many companies have ideas like the family should be of a minimal file size. They make a statement. Bradley, which makes bathroom fixtures that are quite often used, has a whole, and these are hyperlinked. This will take you out to their site. And it talks about creating family types, like, for instance, lean Revit templates, about their sizes being lightweight, not too big, stating that they're between 200K and 750K. It could be easy for us to get very carried away with bringing in these family elements into our file and basically really bloating our file size and slowing down the performance of our software. So it's just something to be kind of balanced along with that idea of wanting to grab all these components from other websites. You want to make sure that you at least check the file sizes to make sure they're not excessively large. And many times it benefits the manufacturer to make them large because they can put a whole bunch of different features like colors, trims, different kinds of details, things that you may not have actually any use for. And we'll talk a little bit about technology in the next clip.